Today, I'm going to be teaching you how to knit the horizontal ribbed pattern. In order to make this pattern, you're going to need the following supplies: some medium worsted yarn in any color, some size 7 US knitting needles, and you'll also need some scissors. Now, in order to get started, we'll need to create a slip knot. This will be the first stitch on our knitting needle. In order to make a slip knot, first make a loop in your yarn so that it looks like the letter E. Then we're going to move the loop of the E over the top of our yarn, grab the loop, and pull it through. Once you've pulled it tight, all you have to do to finish your slip knot is to take one of your knitting needles, put it on there, and grab both sides and pull it tight. There you go, we've made our slip knot. Now we're going to learn how to cast onto our knitting needle. This can be a bit tricky, so I'll go slow. First, take the needle with the slip knot and hold it in your dominant hand. Usually I hold it with all of my fingers, with my pointer finger resting on the slip knot. Next, take your other hand, and the thumb and forefinger will go in between the two strings. You'll grab the rest of them with your other fingers, and then you'll open your fingers again. It should look like this. Now, it's time to start making stitches. In order to do one stitch, you first pull down the knitting needle, go through the thumb loop, over to the pointer finger loop, back through the thumb loop, and then up. To finish, you'll let go of your thumb loop, and then tighten the rest of the strings. And there we go, that's one stitch. Now let's do that again. First, take your knitting needle, move it down, go through the thumb loop, over to the pointer finger loop, back through the thumb loop, let go of your thumb, and pull them tight. There we go. Now you can do this as many times as you want until your pattern is as thick or as thin as you want it to be. Now it's time to start knitting. We'll learn the basic knit stitch first. In order to create one knit stitch, you start by holding the needle with all of our previous cast-on stitches in your non-dominant hand. Then, take the other knitting needle and slide it into the first loop from front to back. I'll show you that close up. We take this first loop and slide in the other needle from front to back. Next, we'll take our working yarn, and it's important to make sure that you're grabbing the yarn that's still connected to your ball of string and not the one that ends in a tail. So take your working yarn, and we're going to wrap it from back to front around our needle. Here, I'll show you that in a different angle. Take your working yarn and wrap it from back to front, right to left on your knitting needle. Next, this is the tricky part. You're going to pull it back through the loop while keeping that string on your needle, just like that. Then push it to the end and off of your knitting needle, and once you tighten it, we'll have our first knit stitch. Now let's do that again. So we're going to take your right or your dominant needle, and it's going to go into the first loop on your non-dominant needle from front to back. Then take your string and wrap it around from right to left. Then the last step is to pull it through, keeping that stitch on there, slide to the end and off, and there we go. There's two. Let's do it one more time, super close up. So take your dominant needle, go through the loop from front to back, take your string, wrap it from right to left around your needle, and then pull it through, keeping that string on your needle. Pull it off, and there we go. And you're going to do this for all of the stitches on our needle. Alright, now that we've finished our very first row, all we have to do is move our working needle to our non-dominant hand, take our now empty needle in our dominant hand, and start all over again with another knit stitch. Just front to back, right to left, back through the loop, off our needle, and there we go. You'll keep doing that again all the way down the row. Now, repeat this step until you have 10 complete rows on your knitting needle. Alright, now that we've knitted 10 full knit rows, this is what our pattern should look like so far. Now this is called a garter stitch. You can tell that it's a garter stitch because all of the loops are horizontal. Next, we're going to learn the stockinette stitch, where all the loops are vertical, and that will create the ribbed pattern that we're going to see in our finished pattern. So in order to create the stockinette stitch, we're going to need to learn how to purl. So this will work almost the same as the knit stitch, just backwards. So first, hold the working needle in your non-dominant hand like always, and slip the needle into the first stitch. Now here's where it's different. Instead of the empty needle going behind our working needle, like it has been for our knit stitch, for the purl stitch, it's going to go in front. It's still going to go from back to front, just in front of our working needle. See the difference? Now that we have it like this, we're going to wrap the yarn around, still from right to left. After we wrap it around, you're going to pull it through the stitch backwards and then off, and that will be one purl stitch. Let's see that one more time. So put our knitting needle through our first stitch in front, still from right to left. Then take your yarn and we're going to put it still behind our needle from right to left. And then when you pull it through, it's going to go behind our first loop and off. Now do that for all the stitches left on this row. Okay, now that we've purled one whole row, you should start to see the beginnings of our stockinette stitch forming. Can you tell how the loops are starting to change direction? Now here's where it's a little bit different. In the garter stitch, all we had to do was knit rows over and over again, and we would get the garter stitch. But for the stockinette stitch, you have to alternate between knitting full rows of knit stitches and full rows of purl stitches. So now that we've finished our one row of purl stitches, the next step will be to knit one full row of knit stitches. It'll start just like always, with the needle going front to back and our working yarn going right to left, pulling it back through and off. And you'll repeat that for this entire row. There we go. Now that we've knitted a full row, it should be even easier to tell that our stockinette stitch is forming. Here's our garter stitch, and here's the beginnings of our stockinette stitch. So now, all you have to do to continue this pattern is to alternate between knit and purl stitches for another 10 rows. So we've already done 2, so the next step would be to do another purl row. And you'll notice that on the back side, it all looks like a garter stitch. This is kind of like the wrong side of our work. And this side will be the right side because it has both of our patterns. So on the wrong side, you're always going to purl, and on the right side, you're always going to knit. So for our next row, it's going to be all purl stitches, and you'll do that for 10 full rows, alternating between a knit row and a purl row. Okay, now we have knitted 10 full rows of stockinette stitch. Now you'll notice as we look at our work that the stockinette stitch takes up more space than the garter stitch. That's because stockinette stitch has more length, but it's also what makes the horizontal ribbed pattern look so interesting in its asymmetrical design. So now that we've done our stockinette portion, the next step is to transfer over our work, and then we're going to knit 10 full rows again. And look at that! Our horizontal ribbed pattern is really coming along now. We have the garter stitch, we have the stockinette stitch, and now we have some more garter stitch. So all we have to do to continue this pattern is start over with our stockinette stitch, and then another garter stitch, and then another stockinette stitch, just 10 rows each, alternating between each one. And you'll do that until you've made your pattern as long as you want it to. Here is our finished product. Now you'll notice that I only repeated the pattern one more time, but you can repeat this pattern as many times as you want to. You can repeat it indefinitely. Now that we have our finished product, however, it's time to cast off. So when you cast off, you're first going to start by knitting a stitch like you always would, front to back, right to left, through, and off. Then one more time, front to back, right to left, through, and off. And now that we have 2 stitches on our needle here, it's going to be different. So what you're going to do is use your working needle to pull the bottom stitch up and over and then off the needle. And that'll leave us with just 1 stitch on our needle. I'll do that again. So you'll knit 1 stitch, and now that we have 2 stitches on our needle, we're going to take this bottom stitch, and using our needle as a helper, we're going to pull it over the top of our needle and over while we're still having this stitch on there. I'll do it one last time. So you're going to knit a stitch, so you have 2 stitches on your needle. Then this bottom stitch here will be lifted up and pulled over the top and over. And you'll do that until you're left with just 1 stitch left on your other needle. There we go. Now we only have 1 stitch left. And so what we're going to do is we're going to widen that stitch a little bit by pulling up our needle, and then put your finger through the loop so it doesn't come undone. And now we can take our needle out. Now you're going to take your scissors and you're going to cut your working yarn while leaving a few inches. So just about there or so. We're going to cut off our yarn, and then you're going to pull it back through the loop. And once you pull it all the way through, all you have to do is pull it tight, and there we go. There is our finished product. Now you're left with 2 strings hanging off, and you can either cut these or you can tie them in a knot. But that's basically it for our horizontal ribbed pattern.